First of all, welcome to the second session of Aarhus Symposium 2015, following the consumer tech track. Now, without further ado, I would like to welcome the moderator who will guide us through this session. He's Professor of Economics at Aarhus University. It is Philip Schröder.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's quite an experience to be in this lecture theater on a Friday afternoon, and it's packed with students. It doesn't usually look that way. It's not that many weeks ago that I have been teaching actually the role of money and banks in the macroeconomy. Wow. And this is not what I'm going to talk about today. It's an absolute pleasure to have Christian Clausen here. He promised me he will both talk about the financial sector, about innovation issues, but also leadership issues. And I know that our students will be very thrilled to also ask you tough and difficult questions on these issues. We're very much looking forward to your presentation and very much looking forward to your question and answer session. One of the top leaders in the Danish financial sector, in the Nordic financial sector. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to see you all. I have, does it work? Yes. I've really been looking forward to come and meet you. I've already met a lot of others, maybe some of you as well, and it's great to hear the energy you all put into this. And I will present to you, and I will do Q&A with you, and I'm really looking forward to hear your questions and some of your comments as well. So I hope we will have a good session also after my presentation. How many of you are into finance, banking, economics, and how many are doing other stuff? Can I see a hand for finance, economics, and so on? That's good, quite a lot. But don't worry, I won't talk too much about finance and banking, actually. I will talk about transformation of businesses in general. And that is my first topic, this global wave of transformation we have, and we all know it really well. And I would like to make a statement, which you can, of course, discuss, but I think these three drivers are the three transformational drivers in all businesses in the coming years. The rest are cyclical drivers like macroeconomics, raw material prices, and so on. Then we have some demographic drivers like people getting older and all this. But these are the three drivers. They are not more than these three. And we all have to relate to them, all businesses, in a major way, including banking. Let's take them one by one. Well, the first one, customer digitalisation, we all know about because we do it all the time, and I observe during these sessions you ask questions and so on. So today, compared to just a few years ago, we have two main fears: that we are in a position in a place with no data connection, and or our battery is running out. And that's the reason why airplanes start to install extra possibilities of charging your batteries, and many of them are now having Wi-Fi on board as well, because they know it's a nasty place to be for 3 hours without connection with your friends. And we know what it did to a lot of businesses. I'm particularly close to Spotify. I advise them. I know the owner and the chairman extremely well. They have been 6-8 years transformed themselves from a new tech startup to the world's largest publisher of music, which is amazing. How many here know Spotify and uses Spotify? Yeah, of course. You see, we all know them, we all use them. So of course, those shops where you could buy a physical disc, not to mention the big black ones, back in the 90s or whenever it was, they do not exist anymore. Complete disintermediation of a whole industry, and we have many examples. That we know about, so that's what I call customer digitalization. The reason why it's so big now, because this has existed for 20 years, 30 years, it is because of the connectivity. The professor and chairman of the Singularity University in the US has done a lot of studies, and it clearly shows that it's not the development of the iPhone or the iPad or everything, it's the level of connectivity. It's only a few years ago, none of us would have started to look at a movie, downloading it real time on a device, or watching streaming television on a device. That we do now. So the connectivity is super important. And the reason why it's so important to note for businesses is, of course, that suddenly when we start to be able to do this, we want anywhere, anytime to be in connection with our service provider, no matter who it is. We want to have real-time access to all information, and we want it to be relevant and personalized to us. Now imagine the repercussion on a business system from this. All your customers at the same time want to access exactly their data in exactly their own way. Now that's called flexibility, and something which most big companies are having problems with. I'll come back to that. Most of it is driven by consumers, but we actually see that B2B starts to develop quite a lot. I've taken one example, Maersk Line, which now offers their customers online, mobile, access to where is a container, when it's due to come, what's the temperature in the container, and so on. So it's B2B is certainly also developing. But of course, it is the consumers who really drives this fundamentally in a big way. The next part, and it's deliberate, I built it into customer digitalization and process digitalization, because the process part is what we all struggle with in business. Because in order to allow this customer digitalization, we have to rebuild our factories. And I use the car industry as an example. I visited some of the big car manufacturing companies like BMW, and this one I cannot mention today, because even the word is not good, but they are actually pretty impressive. Now, what did they do? Now, 15 years ago, they realized that they could not have only standardized models. They need to allow the consumers to design their own car. But first, they remoduled the whole company. They built some platforms. You probably know most car manufacturers build many cars on one platform. They standardized gearing systems, motoring, and so on and so forth. And then they built completely new factories. When I met the head of BMW, and we talked about transformation, they said, yeah, we are a bank, a service bank, that's completely different. We had such big IT. You're a car manufacturer. He said, no, I'm not a car manufacturer. I'm an IT company. Because I produce 35,000 different cars per day, different cars. Imagine the logistics, 35,000. Not two of them are identical. I mean, one is green, one is blue, one is four-wheel drive, one is not, one has a big engine, one has a small, one has a GPS, you know, when you order it. They are not identical, they're all different. Imagine 35,000 cars per day being assembled. This is, of course, logistics, it's IT. It's robots, it's IT systems guiding when the deliveries come into the assembly line. And when they did that, after having done that, they gave the consumers access on the internet to be able to design their own car. So this is the process, of course, and without the process, you could never have done what you did with the consumers. You could never allow consumers free access to your factory. I mean, it will break down. The old factories could not have produced 35,000 cars per day, which are different. Now, exactly the same thing applies for banking. So what is happening right now, because it goes so fast on the mobile connection for our customers, most banks allow customers to go into their factory, because in banking the factory is an IT system, to the factory to get their own data, to exactly personalize them and so on and so forth. The only problem is the factory is not built for it. That's what we call process re-engineering, and it is a consequence of what has happened. And we all know what back in the old days everything was paper. Then we started to use some data processing in the back end in the processes, but only as a tool. Then we had the big surge of the internet banking. You may remember, some of you came in 93, 94, 95. But this was not because the consumers wanted it. It was the banks actually asking the consumers to start to use the internet bank to access their accounts and so on. Very little actually happened until 2000s, when we started to get the mobile devices and this connectivity, and then it has exploded. So today, the issue is that the consumers are digital, the interface is digital, and we are building the back-end digital in a way that we get digital in and digital out, but it requires we rebuild the full factory. It's a big task. I'll come back to that. Now, when I give this speech to CEOs, which I do often, and I was myself at a seminar listening to a speech around this topic, this rhetoric question that often is asked, well, there must be some old things which cannot be digitalized. I mean, this cannot go for everything. Sort of a little wishful thinking from some CEOs, this will not hurt my business. And this particular speaker gave an example. Yes, it will hit everything. And the newest example, which actually is from Finland, is garbage collection. Now, garbage collection. Going to your garden, pick up the garbage bag on a truck and dump it on a dump. I mean, that is physical. That cannot be digital. Come on. Yes, a new company has designed a system where they put a monitor into the garbage bin. So every morning when the chauffeur comes in to collect garbage, the GPS tells him exactly where to go, and it will only go into the houses where the garbage bin is more than 3/4 full. It will skip a lot of houses. It will skip roads if there are no garbage bins which are filled. Only collect the garbage bags which are filled and dump them. This has caused, in those areas where it's been tried out in the US and in Finland by now, 70% cost savings and very satisfied customers. Because you will never go out and open your garbage bin and having it full, because it will be emptied before it's full. So you won't have this problem, which many of us know in other areas, like it's collected every Thursday, so by Wednesday you cannot put more into it, of course. It's a big problem, so you get dissatisfied. But in those areas, it's never full, and they save 70%. So even garbage collection can be digitalized. So there is no end to the examples, and I think any business needs to realize that they need to digitalize their processes rather than later in order to avoid being disintermediated completely. The third element is conduct regulation. I call it that. You can discuss what the name is. This is a huge wave which is also impacting business quite a lot. This whole thing of making sure that you have your consumer protection compliance in order, making sure that you have full control over the data so you don't spread data around. We have lots of examples of that causing problems. The whole health and environment, Lars Rebien talked about that. Corruption and crime and terrorism, which very much is something for the banks to monitor, avoid corruption and crime, avoid terrorism. So today, in reality, the banking system are monitoring every single transaction being made, every single payment you make. We monitor whether the sender or the receiver is listed as a potential drug dealer, terrorist, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, you name it. And we do that today, but the requirements go up and up and up. Imagine that all transactions and all people are being monitored all the time. That's a huge demand also on the IT system, by the way. So this part is another big driver for developing and digitalizing your factory, your processes. But it goes for all businesses. Consumer protection goes up and up and up. We see laws being passed all the time, both in Europe but also in the EU. And we see fines by the billions of dollars for people who do not ensure that their product is safe, protects consumers, and so on and so forth. So this whole thing of making sure that the conduct of the company is in compliance not only with laws, but also with expectations of consumers is a huge demand and also very expensive. It requires very strong systems because it's very complex and it's a lot of risk involved. But also that area points to only one solution, and that is to have digital processes. Of course, monitoring all transactions or anything like that without digital processes is not possible. So a few words on the transformation of banking before I go into what we do about it. This is a slide which shows the journey since 2008, and you all know what happened in 2008. Yeah, in September 2008, the financial crisis really accelerated by the Lehman crash, and since then, some people will argue, still we have a financial, at least the aftermath of the financial crisis on our hands. So if you look at the banking sector, there has been several stages. The first stage was survival. A lot of banks had to survive because asset prices fell and banks got insolvent, so it was about trying to survive, managing the losses. Some didn't make it. A lot of banks didn't make it, actually. A lot of banks went bankrupt. But those who made it, they realized quickly that the first hurdle they had to pass was the capital hurdle. They need to get much more capital. Regulation shot up immediately, ensuring that banks had more capital so the system could become more stable. Banks had to raise capital or retain capital from their earnings. As soon as that started to be okay, the next big requirement is to have return on capital. And first, when you have the capital and the return on capital, you can start to look up and look into the future and start to build your business model. So as long as you are trying to survive, then you cannot do that. And we are only just here in Europe. The average on capital was just met in November last year when we had the stress test and the so-called AQR. So the capital of banks is in order, but the return is not in order. The ROE, the return on capital, is still low in Europe in general. So the return requirements are also very big. Mario Draghi, the head of ECB, said recently in a big speech that before the banks have a decent return, which is above cost of capital on their capital, we don't have a sustainable banking system. Now, cost of capital for banks is somewhere between 9 and 10%, depending on the bank. So a return above 10 is needed for the banking system to be sustainable. So banks in Europe are still struggling to make more money, and that is, of course, something which is super important for the regulators, because next time we have a crisis, they want banks to be profitable, because the first line of defense in a crisis is the banks can start to lose their profit. That's too bad for shareholders, but the regulators are okay. And then if they lose their profit and more, then they eat into their capital. And then, of course, we have the situation we had also back in 2008 and 2009, where banks start to be shaky, and we have this problem that typically we get a financial crisis on our hands. So the banking sector is here. Now, fortunately, Nordea is further away. We are clearly above the capital hurdles. We're also clearly above the return hurdles. So we have actually, for 2 years now, been working on building the future business model. So the reason why a lot of banks are not doing it yet is not because they don't see what's happening out there. It's because they don't have the resources to lift the huge transformation which we are talking about, transforming a bank to become digital. And for a bank that do not produce cars, but digital transactions, of course, this is the lifeblood. It's huge investments. And that's exactly what we are doing. We build capital, we build the return hurdle, and the future relationship bank, the future model we launched 2 years ago. We designed it very clearly in spring this year, and I will tell a little more about that. But first, where are we in Nordea? I have 2 slides here to tell you what we have done. I'll always use these slides. They are my favorite slides. So back in 2006, which happens to be the year when I was announced CEO, so I always use this year, 11 billion in capital, 11 billion euros in capital. Remember that number. We started with 11 billion euros in capital. And I will click to the next one. We have during those years created 26 billion. So starting with 11, we have created additional 26 billion in capital. Out of those 26, nearly 12 was paid out to shareholders as dividend, and the rest was retained as more capital, which means that today, we are building 11 to 23 billion euros. Now this is rather amazing and unique. I met the head of Blackstone, which is a huge private equity fund in the US, and he said to me, this is just like one of our very best private equity funds. They do typically over a period of 8 to 9 years deliver 2.5 times money back. And that's exactly what we have done, because here on the 11 billion, we have created 26, 27 billion. And that's approximately 2.5 times money over this period of time during a financial crisis. So we have shown an amazing capability of building capital, i.e. profits after tax, of course. And that's the reason why we 2 years ago said we need to change the bank, transform it. I'll come back to that a bit more exactly what we did, what we are doing. To digitalize the customer interface, most importantly build the new factory, and ensure that the whole business system gets transformed. Now, not knowing what will happen in coming years, this is typically a transformation which may take 4 to 5 years, huge investments. How do we define what it is we want to build when we don't know the technology 5 years from now? I mean, remembering the iPad was launched 5 years ago, so nobody knew 10 years ago what would happen 5 years ahead. So we don't know either. So we don't know where the technology will take us, but we have a pretty good idea on where we think where the customers are going. So we defined the future state which we are building, all of us in Nordea, as a customer vision. This is what we like the customers to say about Nordea 5 years from now, because if they say that, we know we have met all the requirements they may have. And this is something which is important for all employees in Nordea and all units, because everybody's working with it. We want the customers to say that Nordea is easy to deal with, relevant and competent, anywhere, anytime, where the personal and digital relationship makes Nordea my safe and trusted partner. Now you can double click on each and every of these words, and we have done that, so all our people know that. So when you double click on easy to deal with, this is not so much about technology. It's also technology, but it's very much how we meet people. You all know when you go to a company, sometimes it's easy, simple to address the company and get a quick answer and good service. Other times it's a hassle and formulas and it doesn't work. So we want to build a business system that's easy for the customers to approach. Relevant and competent. Yes, competent we have been working with for many years, but relevance is something that technology blows up to something that is even more important. We all know when we are on the net that things that are not relevant, they get clicked away. I mean, if you sit there, it's pop-ups and all sort of things and information you don't need, you just delete it and click it away in order to try to get to what you want to achieve. So, but when something relevant comes up on the other hand, wow, you say, this is relevant for me. So we need to meet the customer with relevant, personalized information that's relevant so it doesn't get clicked away. And it needs to be competent, of course. Anywhere, anytime is obviously the digital part. It's important to understand that the customers want anywhere, anytime to be in contact with us. That's a huge demand. Of course, with transactions, it's easy. But I'm not only talking transactions, I'm talking advice, I'm talking about a detailed portfolio simulation tool and so on and so forth. Transactions, we're already there, but the whole banking thing is not there. And then the personal and digital relationship. This was a big discussion. We made a lot of customer surveys and so on. Will it all go digital, or will you still need the person? And our conclusion was, yes, we believe this will be a combination between a personal relationship where you know a person, you trust, you can get advice from, and then you do all your daily transactions and advice sessions and so on the net, on the mobile. We made a survey. We also this year in January launched a campaign called Customer Talks. We asked all our employees to go out with their smartphone and video a customer interview, or do a customer interview with the video posted on our intranet, where they asked the customer, how do you think our relationship will be in the future? And I was the first one out, so I went to Martin Lorentzen, the chairman of Spotify, and asked him, so Martin, how will the relationship between us in the future, 5 years from now? And you know what he said? He said, yes, of course, digital, I want everything digital. He's a super digital thinking guy, of course, Spotify. And then he said, but last week I was out looking at a new home, and I called my banking advisor from Nordea to come along to make sure, because now he was into more difficult waters, buying a house to do it and so on and so forth. And as he said, next year, when I'm going to do my IPO on New York Stock Exchange, I want you, Christian, sitting next to me to advise me. So when we do important things, we still want somebody to advise us. We don't really believe on the net. And therefore, we believe that we will build a business system around a personal and digital relationship. Of course, with a super strong digital relationship as well, but we should not forget the personal. And that's a reason for the end statement, which I think is the most important. Makes Nordea my safe and trusted partner. Doing this right, we will build a safe room on the net. We all know the net is the Wild West. I mean, you get pop-ups, you get hacked, all sort of things happen. It's actually a hassle to get through the net to exactly what you want to do often. It's the Wild West. But in the mobile bank of Nordea, it's nice and easy, soft music, no hackers, no pop-ups. It's a wonderful place to be in your life. So you will trust us because you know the advisor, you know from experience you get right advice. We will always take the starting point in your needs when we advise. So you will have trust in it. Nordea is also one of the absolute strongest banks in the world, so you can trust us with your money. So in this safe room, I use it as a picture. When you go into that, you can do your transactions, you can talk to your advisor, you can do all sort of things there. That's our vision, that's what we want to build, and we want the customers to say that. Now this is our GPS, set 5 years from now. So all our units, all our 30,000 people, but also all our business units have set this GPS. They are now saying, what do we have to do to get there? Within retail, within wholesale, within investment banking, within asset management, within international banking, within cash management, within whatever. They all think about what is it we have to do now to get there. So think about 30,000 people moving into the future with exactly the same GPS. Then I'm quite sure we will get there. Compared to somebody who have not done it, this is also called a vision, of course. Those who have not done it, there were 30,000 people moving into the future. Where will they end? Yeah, they will end anywhere, of course. They will all move in this direction. Now, it's not only them deciding. Of course, we need centrally to do something. And we launched a simplification program 2 years ago, reflecting that mobile transactions, which only have existed for 4 or 5 years, I mean, is taking off. This is millions per quarter. The number of branch transactions are going down and is disappearing. And I get a question from a journalist, why are you closing branches? And I show this picture, I mean, because people do not go to the branch, they go to the smartphone. More importantly, we launched last year as the first bank in the Nordics, online advice sessions. Normally, with our customers, they book a meeting and they get advice of the whole financial system. We call that advice meetings. That has been done physically, but we started last year that you can do it on the pad, for example, so with video, and you sit there watching each other talking at home, and then you get all sort of slides and pies and overview of your financial situation. That started in December, or rather November 14, 1 year ago. In September, 13% of all meetings were done this way. And those who did it, they were much more satisfied with digital meetings, and 95% of them would recommend it to their best friend to do that. So this number is going up as well, just showing it's not only transactions, it's also this very important personal relationship. But front-end solutions are not enough. As I said, we have to build the factory. The end-to-end digital response needs to be the new factory, just like the car industry. We need to have the factory. And we are building it as we are also developing the customer interface. The whole simplification program is a lot of things. I will not go into details, just saying that we're starting by simplifying the bank, making it more accessible. We are closing down 81% of all our products over 1 year, migrating customers into new products and so on. We are already there. We are automating, and we're investing in new common core IT systems with an investment which is about 10 billion over these years. It's actually probably closer to 15. We have not said the figure loud yet, but most analysts expect it to be 15 billion, and I'm close to be in that camp. A huge investment. So this is the reason why, as I said earlier, a lot of banks are not that yet, because you need to have the capital and the return on capital before you start to use this kind of money. And this is not for the front end, this is the new factory. On top of that, we will build the front end. But the new factory will build on modern technology. It will just like the car factory with robots and automate digital in and digital out, no paper. And it will look like the car factory. Today we have 1,000 products. We have 30 account platforms. In the future, we will have 5 products. And for example, on the savings area, we will have 1 product. But each product can be designed by the customer exactly as they want, with maturity, all sort of things. And that means that all 11 million customers in Nordea can have their own product in reality. The number of combinations is more than 11 million. So the customers can choose exactly their own product, which is suitable for them. Exactly like the car industry, a common platform, 5 common platforms, 5 different cars, but you can individualize it down to whatever you need. Just one example, I will not go through the IT system here. I often got the question, to take such a big decision, which is super transformational, reaching several years ahead, how do you take such a decision, all the risks involved, if it's now the wrong decision, and how to implement it? Huge implementation risk, of course. And the interesting thing is, the way we came about it was, we actually made a lot of scenarios, and there are actually sort of 8 scenarios you can think about in the future, which are possible, you don't know which one, but they can be boiled down to 3. So one thing is nothing happens, the state we have today continues. Not very likely, but not all impossible. And the other extreme is complete disruption of banking industry. Google, Apple, whoever starts to do all sorts of banking, and everything gets super competitive, and we get what you call disintermediated. And in all these 8 scenarios, it was clear that the only logical response was to simplify the bank and do this investment. Because if nothing happens, you will get a huge cost benefit from the digitalization, because you get rid of all the paper and all the manual work and so on. And the other extreme, if you get a full disruption, you need flexibility, agility to respond. So say somebody out there globally suddenly has a completely new banking feature you all want. You better have a flexible system so you can build it fast and have it as well And that is very difficult on the old system, because the old system is, of course, characterized by being programmed to do exactly what it was asked to, not to suddenly work in a completely different way. So you can say the whole risk picture was boiled down to implementation risk, which is, of course, also big when you transform a full company like a bank, to implement all these changes, make people understand them, the new systems, and so on and so forth. But the scenario risk has been reduced to a minimum, because it's quite obvious that this response is the only reasonable one. And I've not found anybody yet who has said something against this argument yet. Yeah, there's another strategy or scenario which is possible. I don't think so. Now, while we do all these transformations, we should never forget who we are. So our values in Nordea is very important. And it's also, when I discuss this with other companies, we should not forget our values or our vision. Our vision, I described, our customer vision, which is very clear. But our values, which we have worked with since 2006, we created them because Nordea was a bank that was merged. So to create one set of values, which guided us all, has been immensely important. And these values will also be equally important going forward. And they are great customer experiences. And the short way to explain what that means is that everything everybody does in Nordea have only one purpose, and that is to create great customer experiences. Of course, it goes for the customer people and product people, but it also goes for IT people, compliance people, legal people, the receptionist. Everybody should think about everything I do when I'm at work has only one purpose, only one, and that is to deliver service to our customers. Everything else comes second. So that's the whole drive of the organization, to be super focused on delivering to customers. And the way we will do it is to lift the value of it's all about people. It's all about people. It's actually, the meaning of it is actually a sentence which I stole from John D. Rockefeller. You know Rockefeller Plaza in New York. Probably some of you have been there, where they have an ice skating rink in the winter in the middle of Manhattan. And if you stand there looking at that and you turn around, you will see a big granite stone. On that granite stone, John D. Rockefeller has written some famous words on how he thinks the world should look like. And one of them, the sentences goes like this. And just when we made these values, I was on an investor roadshow in New York, and I was actually there, and I looked at the stone and said, this will be great. It says, everyone in the world has a personal obligation to take responsibility for improve the state of the world. So imagine 7 billion people in the world personally taking responsibility to do something good for the world. Then the world would be a better place to live in. And I think, fine, out goes the world and in goes Nordea. So everyone in Nordea has a personal obligation to improve the state of Nordea. What does that mean? It means every single employee, not the unit, not the boss, not me, not the bank. I, as an employee in Nordea, have a personal obligation to take responsibility every day I meet at work to say, how can I do things better? And what is it I should do better? That's, of course, the customer service, because everything everybody does only have one purpose. And one Nordea team to put it all together. We will do it together. You cannot do this alone. Certainly not this transformation I'm now talking about. So putting it all together, this value set is the one which makes people work together and make them focus on customers and realize that all of us have to do things. This is a powerful value set, and we should never forget it when we transform our business, because this characterizes who we are and therefore also distinguish us from competitors. So the vision is defined by a customer vision, not surprisingly, with our values, but I think defines very well what kind of bank it is we will build. Exactly what products and services comes out of it, I don't know, because I also think 5 years from now, the financial world will look significantly different. So my final slide. Now, how many in here know Bob Dylan? Yeah, you're a bit young, many of you, to remember, but this was something I thought the times they aren't changing, a very famous song back in the beginning of the 70s. You better start swimming or you sink like a stone, for the times they are changing. A wonderful song, and that was true in the 60s and 70s when the youth rebelled against the old establishment, the rigid structures in society, including universities and professors, by the way. They rebelled. They wanted to change the world. and exactly the same that happens now. All consumers and businesses rebel from the old analog physical system into the digital one, and we better start doing it or we will sink like a stone. Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Aarhus Symposium is about leaders of tomorrow meeting leaders of today, and I've been monitoring the questions. You're in for a treat, Christian. So I hope these questions made it to the top. Fantastic. Bitcoin. So you talked a bit about disruption, and students asked to reflect on the sort of responses. You said simplification. Maybe you can also put in there was another question that didn't make it to the top: crowdfunding. If you can take that in one type of disruptive environment that could challenge your business model.
Bitcoin builds on a technology called blockchain. Do you know what blockchain is? Blockchain technology, yeah. So we are one of 20 banks globally who last week announced an initiative to together build, based on the blockchain technology, a system to make global transaction, payments, settlements, all sort of things, to start to build that together, because we believe the blockchain way of organizing transaction globally is a very strong feature, and we are only 20 banks doing it. It requires a lot of resources, but we think it can enable a lot of things connected to the simplification program. I'm not an IT expert, so I will not say more about blockchain, but I will say something about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a blockchain system. On top of that is built a virtual currency, Bitcoin, which has no central bank behind it, no backing, except from the system. And as such, it's actually an okay system. And if it had been used in an ethical and proper manner from the beginning by all the people who are using it, it could probably have developed into a world currency. Now it's going to be a phenomenon for a few years and it will disappear. Just last week, Taiwan made it illegal to use Bitcoins because a criminal gang had blackmailed the government, local government, and the ransom should be paid in Bitcoin. Drug dealers, you probably know some of the drug sites. No, hopefully you don't know some of the drug sites, I should say, but there are drug sites out there where you can buy marijuana and other stuff using Bitcoins and so on. And it's quite normal to see illegal and criminal transactions being executed on Bitcoin because they are untraceable, nobody knows who owns them, and so on and so forth. So because of that, I can guarantee you, if you get anywhere close to Bitcoin, you are being monitored by the US authorities. I guarantee it. I know it. And we as a bank cannot be involved in Bitcoin because we cannot verify. You know, we have this new regulation called Know Your Customer and ensuring anti-money laundering. So if we are close to somebody with Bitcoin, we cannot verify where the money comes from, whether they are legal or illegal or terrorist or whatever. So we cannot be close, but I advise all of you not to be close either, because I guarantee all your transactions from the day you're into that will be monitored by the US authorities. And they are doing this because approximately 50% of Bitcoin transactions are estimated to be illegal.
So you answer that on Bitcoin, regulators will take care of keeping the marketplace undisrupted on that, in essence?
It might be regulated and then it might be fine, okay. But then it will become a currency. Okay. Because it's regulated, it needs to be backed, it needs to be all sorts of things.
If a new startup came up with something like Bitcoin, would Nordea buy it? Could you imagine yourself that a big bank in Northern Europe would invest in a project like that?
I personally do not think that will happen. I think the blockchain technology will be developed by the banks, and on that you can make transactions cross-border and settlements and all sort of things very, very cheap in the future. And that will replace the need for a common currency, because if you can change the existing currencies with no fee and no charge, then why do you need an extra currency? And this thing of having a global currency, I think, is also politically something that a lot of politicians don't like, and I don't think the people actually like it either when it comes down to it.
Okay. Let's stay with the difficult questions.
Okay.
Everyone in this room has at some point in time passed an exam talking about first mover advantages in Cournot equilibria and stuff. Let's talk about mobile pay and SWIFT for a moment. So what are your thoughts on a mobile pay?
Your mobile pay is electronic DAN card. In essence, all the banks had agreed to develop this together. Then one bank broke it out and did it alone, and the others continued and made the famous swish. So now we don't have one DAN card, now we have two and maybe more. I welcome that development. 5 years from now, we won't have any of them. We will have whatever, international or other or fifth generation, because transacting money between individuals is something we in the Nordic space, particularly Denmark, has made a commodity many years ago when we created the DAN card system. The banks created the DAN card system, and you all know it's free of charge for the consumer to use. So there's no revenues for the banks and no cost for the consumers. When that happens, then you open up completely the infrastructure. And I think that's a good development. In all other countries in the world, it's very, very expensive to do those transactions. Not for the individual, but when you put them together, 18% of Wells Fargo is the biggest domestic US bank, 80% of their revenues come from payments. So they are, of course, threatened by digital payments where they don't get the payment. But in the Nordics, the banks just want to develop it. So if an international standard comes, we will use that. And it might be mobile pay, it might be Swish, it might be something else. I actually think that the technology within payments are moving very rapidly. And as I said, the blockchain technology may move it even faster. So payments will be something we just do. It's a commodity, and we don't think too much about who's providing the engine behind it.
Remember, we also take questions right from the audience. Just raise your hands and we go. On that last point, so you sort of argue that the cooperation of banks in Denmark had fostered the opportunity for smaller banks to go onto infrastructure that the bigger ones would maintain. Is that the reason why we have more banks per capita than most other European countries, or?
Yeah, that's at least one of the reasons.
So you helped along your own competitors for too long? Is that
no,
what you're saying?
Actually I think it's fine. We just have done that development much further than other countries in the world. It will happen all over the world, of course, sooner or later, driven by consumers. We just made it happen much earlier.
I would like to move to a bit out of the financial sector, because I know our students are excited to also think about your reflections as a leader and your path there, getting there. And I would like the third question, being one of the most high-profile CEOs in Denmark, what is the most important choices, or have been the most important choices in your leadership that you made in order to reach that position?
That's a good question. It gives me possibility to say something of what I think you should do to think about it, because I get this question always when I visit universities or business schools. I think there are three elements which are super important to think about. The first thing is you should always choose with your heart, not with your brain. Don't think too much about your future career, you like a list. Use your heart, do something you think you like, is funny, and which you know how to do. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to spend a lot of hours. You have to be good at something. You cannot create a career by swapping around. This famous book by Gladwell saying 10,000 hours, somebody of you have probably read it. It takes 10,000 hours to be a world-class piano player, ice hockey player, economist or whatever. You have to spend 10,000 hours on something to be really good at it. When you're really good at that, you can spend 10,000 hours on something more, and then you're really good at that as well. But to have a few thousand hours on your baggage, doing various things, you will meet some tough opposition out there, i.e. all those who have spent 10,000 hours. And 5 years at a university, working 8 hours per day, 7 days a week, gives nearly 10,000 hours. But that's not on one thing, because at the university, you learn a lot of things. You have different subjects, but you also start, the first year at least, you probably use just to get to know how to study and write essays and so on, and then you start to, and then finally the last few years you dive into something. But 10,000 hours you probably will not have on anything by the way you are finished. So I advise you to find something with your heart, dive into it, and then make sure that you spend some time on it and move on to the next one. And the third one is you have to not focus too much on your career in general, but focus on your job. You have to perform in your job. And in a company like Nordea, this is a very important message to everyone. If you perform in your job, if you live the values, if you dive into things, you will be seen by the company, and the company will ask you to do something else, to join a talent program, to move to another area, take a more senior position or something, whatever it is. You will be seen. And it's interesting when I observe all our young talents, and we have hundreds and hundreds of graduates we are taking in recent years. I can tell you, I can see just when I meet them which ones are most occupied in the head of their career and which are most occupied of delivering in their job. And you know what? Those who are occupied by delivering in their job, they will be seen and they will do a better career than the ones that are thinking too much about it. So perform in your career, live the values or the vision of the company, spend 10,000 hours on something and get really good at it, maybe on 2 things after a while, and then I think the career will take charge of itself. That's my advice. And actually, I wouldn't say I have done it because I've never been very thoughtful about these things, but I can tell you I have never thought that much about my career because I've been in this extremely lucky situation that others have seen me and asked me to do something more and different all the time. But it's still my advice.
That's a hands-on recommendation there.
Yeah.
Any things, implicitly not to do, would you care to share one of your failures or things that went wrong early in the career, things that you don't want people to repeat or don't recommend to repeat?
Yeah, but
you don't.
But there are so many things afterwards you can say you should have done differently. So that's this very difficult question. And after the fact, you can easily see. But that's called the learning process. If you afterwards could see you should have done something different, then you learn. Next time you are in a similar position, you will learn from that. So I think instead of calling it failures and mistakes, I would rather call it learning points in my career. And I have a lot of those. I mean, believe me.
Okay, free
we
tutorials.
Have all, done, and as I always say, to be really good at, for example, in a bank, to take risk, to do credits or market risk, you have to have tried it and have lost money. When you lose money and cannot sleep at night because you know now I've done a real mistake, you don't do it again. That's the only way to get really serious about it. That's the reason why I always ask our risk takers to start young and in small scale, because when they do mistakes, they should do it small scale and not big scale, learn from it, and then when they eventually do big scale, then they have learned the trade.
Let's take a question that just came up again from Daniel on staying a bit in the recruitment area, sort of early careers. Which qualifications are valuable in Nordea? So you told us already how a person inside Nordea performs, but at the recruitment moment, what does matter? Is it grades? Is it other things? Is it internships? What matters?
But we of course the usual stuff about qualifications, but that's today very broad. I mean, we're looking for engineers, mathematicians, economists, and all sort of things. But we are also more and more looking upon the social and skills and interpersonal skills. It is clearly so we need some specialists who are sort of drowning themselves into a certain area and very good at that. We need some of those, so that's good. We need some of those who are very good at meeting customers. We need some of those who are potential leaders who can lead, energize and motivate people to move in a certain direction. So we need all skills. So we are actually, when we are taking in graduates right now, we are not too focused on how high grades they have. We are equally focused on the other things. And the way we do it is that we were the first bank 6 years ago that launched speed dating as a hiring mechanism for graduates. I don't know if anybody have tried it, but we did it for European audiences. So we took in like 40 young potential graduates from business schools all over Europe. We put them together physically in one room with a large table, put them opposite one of our own young employees, having been with Nordea for say 2 or 3 years, and they could ask all sort of questions. I mean, how is it to work here? What's the values? How's the canteen working? I mean, do you get any pay or whatever they wanted? And every 5 minutes they switched, and after 2 hours the session stopped, and it was a fantastic, and is a fantastic means still to get potential graduates to get to know a lot about Nordea instead of me just talking and explaining it. They can ask young people who are in a similar position, just a little older, what has the experience for Nordea been? So we don't look, and out of those sessions, we try clearly to then see which ones have the skill, or the combination of skills of a certain knowledge, certain grades, certain personal skills, and certain other things. And one of the reasons is it's clear by now that a lot of things that is happening requires a lot of other skills than the sort of the traditional ones which we have been looking for.
Would you think that at Nordea you would hire a person that is out of character in terms of the degree? So could a person from whatever physics enter
oh yes,
Nordea?
We have a lot of physics and mathematicians and biologists and doctors and other people who thought they would use education for this. The thing about grade, if you have a lower grade, but there's a good explanation, I've interviewed many people where I like the person a lot, I also like what they have done, and I ask why do you have a bad grade here and there, because often the average is taken down by a few grades. And if the explanation is super good, I work too much. I organized, for example, this symposium for a full year, so in that year I got worse grades. That's not a disqualifier, that's a qualifier, having done Aarhus Symposium, and that might lead to lower grades, I don't know, or whatever. So there might often be a good explanation. If there's a good explanation, we do not mind that the grades are lower.
Perfect. We have a question from the audience. If you hand over the microphone. Thanks a lot. I, of course, hoped that grades were everything, because this is the only thing I can influence, but what a news.
But knowledge is everything.
Knowledge matters.
That's equally good.
All right, well, I'd like to know how you handle ambidexterity in Nordea. That means like working in an environment where you have the paradox of both exploring new options and innovative new systems, while also focusing on exploiting your current systems. How do you handle that balance?
But that is the big issue. I mean, you can say, unlike the car manufacturers who could produce cars on the old factory while they built the new one, we cannot really do that. We have sort of to build the factory while we produce on it. That makes it more complicated. And we have to fulfill your needs as a customer while we do it. So we cannot say, we won't do anything for 3 years, and then we'll do everything in a short while. We have to gradually deliver digital solutions as we go. It's very difficult, but we have to say that we have to give priority to the big simplification program. We strongly believe that those who have a brand new, fully flexible factory 3 to 5 years from now, they will clearly be the winners. They will be winners of cost, it will be much cheaper. They will be the winners in flexibility. I mean, in the new system, it's a matter of hours before you have produced a new app. That's not the case today, I can guarantee it. And the whole flexibility thing. So we are giving priority to the long-term solution. So we will not spend our money on short-term solutions, which might here now fix a problem, and then wake up 3 years from now, wow, now we have competitors and now we cannot respond. Having said that, we are developing, so we have dedicated teams developing our digital offering, and we have talked about, we have, for example, a thing working for us, which is very good, called Nordea Next. So on our mobile bank, we have chosen, or rather around 2,000 customers have signed up to be part of Nordea Next. And Nordea Next, we have today 12 new initiatives live, and these 2,000 customers use these initiatives, and they give feedback to us, and ups and downs, you know, and so on. And if we think it's a good initiative, we will launch it for every customer. If it's not, it will be put away. We just launched 2 weeks ago that we will do fingerprint access to the mobile bank, which is crossing through all codes and passwords and stuff, just a fingerprint as the first bank, because that was in Nordea Next, the one that got the highest marks. And we will, in that way, every month launch a new feature from Nordea Next. The other thing we're doing is we have just, maybe you saw it in the newspapers 2 weeks ago, launched Nordea Accelerator, where we have signed up with 15 fintech companies doing exciting things. We had 170 applicants from fintech companies, which are sitting in Nordea in the building. They get food, they get coaching, they get some money, and then they keep developing their fintech solutions. And we guide them how to do it for Nordea to take use of it, but they can do whatever they like. They can also just keep doing what they're doing. But in that sense, we have sort of a collaboration with the fintech industry, and this works well, which I think it will do, because now it's been in small scale working for a year. I think we will increase that number. So we actually in-house groom the new fintech solutions, which we will then guide a bit, and that is a help for the fintech company, because we know more how to use it than they do. They maybe know more how to make it and how to think about it. So there's no easy answer to it. I would say the long-term solution has to take priority, but of course we have to deliver in the short term at the same time. And that's the reason why this transformation is more difficult than previous ones, because it's everybody at the same time. It's not one part of the bank or another part of the bank. It's the whole bank at one go that transforms everything we do. Every single system, every single daily routine will be changed. And of course, this is a huge change, because A lot of people like to do what they did yesterday, tomorrow. So of course, it's a mindset, it's a value thing, and it's an IT thing. So very difficult transformation, which requires fantastic leadership, which I hope we have, because we think we have it, and they are the ones that we carry this through.
We have another question from the audience, so if you just shout and I'll repeat your question. Yes?
I think we can say that digitalization has also contributed to the decentralization of funding in terms of possibility for entrepreneurs and startups. Does Nordea see itself as fighting that trend a little bit and enticing entrepreneurs to come back to Nordea for their funding solution?
So the question was the new match between lenders and borrowers that digital solutions have been bringing, and what is Nordea's stance there and views there?
Yeah, we have a special setup for how we handle entrepreneurs, but we have to realize that what entrepreneurs often need is capital, don't need to borrow money, they need more equity capital. We do not provide equity capital as a bank. We have depositors giving us money, which we lend, then we get the money back and give them to depositors again. We don't do equity. We have working relationship with venture capitalists and others that do capital, but we don't do capital. But on the funding side, we do help them. And the most important help an entrepreneur actually needs these days is to get the right advice on what to do more than the money. Because entrepreneurs often have the thinking that with very little capital, they can borrow a lot of money, carry their project through, and then most of them fail just before they get there because the funding dries up at exactly the time where they have no product, therefore no revenue, and then the whole thing collapses. So the best advice to give to an entrepreneur is to ensure that you start up with enough capital to make sure you don't collapse just months before you have the product, but you have enough to go all the way through. And then we help them in various sources of capital and funding. But I can say that I welcome all the other sources of funds which can be done specifically now in digitalized form, everything from crowdfunding, shadow banking, whatever it is. We welcome it all. We think it's fantastic help to entrepreneurs. Because unfortunately, bank regulation has meant that banks have to hold much more capital than previously, and that particularly hurts those with high risk, which an entrepreneur typically has. We have to post so much capital that the margin to borrow money from a bank, if you have high risk, is really not the place to go. Then you better go somewhere else. That's a bit unfortunate because banks have a big role to play there as well, but that's the ruling and the regulation as it is today. So we cannot really step in if the risk is very high, but we do advise these customers to get funding from other sources. So we welcome everything that's happening around the banking system. It's not like we want to own it all necessarily.
Christian, let me challenge you on that question a bit more, because banking industry is probably the only sector in the world that manages to convince customers that sales staff are not sales staff but advisors. And that's in itself already quite an important thing. Now, if you think about the consumption patterns that the next generation of customers will see, they trust more the likes of their friends on Facebook when they get advice on shopping than they trust the advice of a salesperson, right? So is this not going to be a threat to you, to the model of the trusted advisor?
Yes, it's an argument that we meet often, but we very rarely meet it from customers, I have to say. Of course, we are there, but our strategy, which is a relationship strategy, is around advising a customer and ensuring that we advise him all through his life. So when he's young, it's about borrowing money for the first house, for the first business. Later on, it's about saving for the retirement and so on, the whole life cycle. And since we have 11 million customers, some are old and some are young, so some are saving and some are borrowing, and we put that together in a balance sheet. We have deposits and lending. So we don't push lending products, we don't push savings products. Our biggest objective is to ensure that customers understand what they're doing financially and to help them advise them around that. So we don't have a sales culture, in my opinion. But those who don't like it can seek other advice. But in practice, that's not an argument we meet often from customers. When I meet customers, I meet retail customers, private bank customers, and corporate customers. That's not an issue. Of course, they should check pricing and so on. It's a competitive market. They can do that. But actually the advice, I think a lot of people who are not educated in finance or banking are much better off trusting the advice from the bank than starting to trust the likes of their friends. I have to say, that's for sure.
So banking becomes
that's good advice.
So banking becomes consultancy,
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
We want to close the session now. One thing I would ask you to tell our participants, because now it's Friday and it's Saturday, Sunday. What do you want them to think about Monday when they start back at the lecture theatre to study? What is the one thing you hope that they keep in mind?
Yeah, but it might be a little repetition. No, for my speech, you mean?
Advice for their careers.
For advice, what you should do, I really mean what I said earlier on. I think you should focus on being really good at something. It's not enough to know a little about everything. You have to be really good at something. You will meet somebody afterwards out there who's really good at something you are trying to do, and then you will see the difference. And that's the reason why it takes, I mean, you don't get a real good McKinsey consultant until you've been 4 or 5 years at McKinsey, because it takes a lot of time to be good at something. So be good at it, but as I said, choose with your heart and not with your brain so much when you choose what to do, what subjects to take, what job to take afterwards. I think it's more important. You need to be fully occupied. You need to want it with your heart, because if you want it with your heart, you will also spend the 10,000 hours, and then you will be seen performing, and then the company would give you options to develop further and new jobs and whatever.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for all the questions and answers.
Thank you.